get started. Again, my name is Alfred Ayub. I am the Senior Director of Admissions here at Columbia Climate School, and we are thrilled that you're joining us today to learn more about this very dynamic and unique one-year professional degree program that is the MS in Climate Finance program. In terms of the agenda, what we will be covering, we're going to go ahead and give you a little bit of a broad overview on Columbia Climate School. We're then going to provide some more details relating to our MS in Climate Finance curriculum, professional development opportunities at the Climate School, financial aid, the application process, and then we will conclude, and I will say more than half of this session is going to be made up of our faculty panel. So now, without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our faculty who are joining us today. Let's begin with Lisa Sachs, who is Associate Professor of Professional Practice at Columbia Climate School and Director of the MS in Climate Finance program. Professor Sachs is also the Director of the Columbia Center on Sustainable Investment, a joint center of Columbia Climate School and Columbia Law School. Since joining CCSI in 2008, she established and oversees CCSI's interdisciplinary research and advisory work on the alignment of investment law, practice, and policy with the Sustainable Development Goals. She is globally recognized expert in the ways that laws, policies, and business practices shape global investment flows and affect sustainable development. She works with governments around the world, regional and international development organizations, financial institutions, companies, civil society, organizations, and academic centers to understand the interrelations of investment flow and sustainable development, and to influence investment policies and practices to promote the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. We also have joining us today Bruce Usher, who is a professor of professional practice and the Elizabeth B. Strickler and Mark T. Galogli Faculty Director of the Tamer Institute for Social Enterprise and Climate Change at Columbia Business School, as well as Professor of Professional Practice in the Faculty of Climate at Columbia Climate School. Professor Usher teaches courses in climate change, finance, and business, and is a recipient of multiple teaching awards. Prior to his work at Columbia, Professor Usher was the CEO of Eco Securities Group, which developed greenhouse gas emissions reduction projects in developing countries and was acquired by JP Morgan in 2009. Professor Usher is an active investor and advisor to entrepreneurial ventures focused on climate change and clean energy, and is chair of the Tamer Fund for Social Ventures. Thank you both for joining us. Professor Usher, Professor Lisa Sachs, architects behind this program. You're going to get a lot of insights from them for the second half. So again, thank you both, Professor Usher and Professor Sachs, for joining. Let me now go ahead and provide a little bit of an introduction on Columbia University and Columbia Climate School itself. So it's always helpful to hear a little bit more about Columbia University. So Columbia University is a major research institution. It's the oldest university in the state of New York, the fifth oldest in the United States. It's considered by many to be a blueprint of research institutions. And when you refer to Columbia University, you're referring to an institution that has multiple schools that fall underneath that umbrella term, the majority of those schools being professional graduate schools, for example, like Columbia Law School or the School of International and Public Affairs. In particular, the Columbia Business School, one of the leading business schools in the world. The Climate School is the newest addition to Columbia University. And in terms of its history, the newness of it, it was announced in 2020. It was formally launched in 2021. But I always like to say that the Climate School wasn't developed out of thin air. In fact, the university itself has been in the climate sustainability space, sustainable development space for decades. And in fact, the Climate School was built out of the largest research center at Columbia University, which was the Earth Institute. It eventually became Columbia Climate School. And within the Climate School is also Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory. In fact, I believe Columbia University has the highest number of climate scientists affiliated with the institution. So we have a very, very long history in the climate space. And in terms of our ethos, the world requires knowledgeable leaders to work with business, communities, governments, and civil society to address the climate crisis. Columbia Climate School's graduate degree programs and other learning opportunities provide an interdisciplinary knowledge base for climate leaders with diverse interests and backgrounds. And again, you're going to hear the word interdisciplinary woven throughout today's session. Climate touches everything. So we have to, as a climate school, be able to partner uh, with various sectors, industries, professions when it comes to addressing climate challenges and also seeking out climate opportunities and innovations. In terms of our partnership with Columbia Business School, I want to just speak a little bit more about it because this is an incredibly unique degree program. While it is the MS in Climate Finance program is a Columbia Climate School degree, what makes it incredibly valuable is its very close partnership with Columbia Business School. And to give you a little bit of background, Columbia Business School's partnership is going to play that pivotal role in shaping and delivering this degree. That, again, interdisciplinary collaboration combines Columbia's expertise in finance with cutting-edge climate research, preparing future leaders to address the financial challenges of climate change, but also to take advantage of those opportunities that come with it and the innovations that we're seeking out as it relates to climate change. The program integrates the strengths of both schools, leveraging Columbia Business School's decades of leadership in sustainable business practices and climate innovation to equip students with the necessary skills for impactful careers in climate finance. In terms of the MS Climate Finance program itself, just pivoting to speak specifically to the degree, this is a one-year STEM-designated degree program. It's delivered over 3 semesters. It always begins in the fall. It's 39 credit hours in length. And again, just highlighting this interdisciplinary nature of climate science and fundamental financial management practices that equip students with the financial decision-making skills to respond to climate change. There are 4 kind of overarching themes of this curriculum that we want students to take away from. It's to understand the science of climate change and its impacts on varying economic, social, and environmental impacts, to translate the implications of climate research into appropriate financial and business language and decision-making, to assess risks and opportunities associated with climate change. Climate risk is going to be woven throughout this. In fact, that's one of your finance core courses, the idea of risk. And then evaluate the financial tools and strategies that can be applied to accelerate the energy transition and to finance critical investments in mitigation and adaptation. An aerial snapshot of this degree program is a 3-semester sequence, as I mentioned earlier. In terms of your fall semester, it would be a mix of climate core and finance core courses. You then transition to your spring semester where you continue a finance core sequence and you begin taking elective courses with a focus on finance and climate. And then your summer semester, you're going into elective courses of climate and finance, but also capping off your sequence with the ultimate translating those concepts into actual practice, either through a capstone workshop, or alternatively, you may possibly wish to pursue an internship, and we'll talk about that further as well. I'll just briefly discuss the core courses now embedded within the MS in Climate Finance program. So in terms of the climate school side, you have the climate core. That's going to be made up of dynamics of climate variability and change. You can think of this as it's a physics class. This is going to teach you kind of the why behind climate change. Inevitably, when somebody stops you on the street and says, do you believe in climate change? You'll say yes. And then they say the why. This is going to anchor you in the science behind what is exactly occurring. You're also going to be exploring climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation. These are kind of the 2 pillars to address how to respond to climate change. In fact, Professor Lisa Sachs is teaching one of the core courses this semester, climate change mitigation. I've heard phenomenal feedback from our students about it. And then within this climate core is another additional course, which is international climate finance. I want to just address something that we have seen several students asking about in terms of climate justice. And I always like to highlight the fact climate justice is truly going to be woven throughout the climate core curriculum, and especially within that international climate finance course. Then we transition into a finance core. Again, you're taking the finance core and the climate core together. In terms of the finance core, you have foundations, evaluation, corporate finance, capital markets and investments, climate finance and climate risk. What I like to highlight is that Columbia Business School delivers many of these courses in half terms. So the one course that would be delivered over an entire semester would be capital markets and investments. The other courses listed might be offered in a term A or a term B, for example. And then we get to our final semester. Again, the idea of translating these concepts that you're learning into practice and you actually applying them. And it would be applying them either in a summer capstone workshop or alternatively an internship. So I'll just describe the capstone workshop as a live consulting project with an external client. These external clients, I will say, are going to be sourced by Columbia Climate School. And each workshop partners with a team of about 6 graduate students with a faculty advisor. The goal is to provide clients with innovative analysis and practical recommendations while climate finance students gain experience by working on a real world problem. The second option is an internship. Now, one thing I do want to note about the internship is this is going to be, you're going to have many supports in place in terms of career supports, and I will be speaking that momentarily in the next few slides, but this is something that students will be sourcing themselves, so securing the internship. We don't have a placement program in internships. It's going to be independently sourced with some resources, obviously, by Columbia Climate School. But this is going to obviously be a hands-on immersive experience that takes place over the summer in a climate finance related role. The internship can be either paid or unpaid and offers students the opportunity to apply their academic learning to a real world challenges, gaining, again, practical insights into financial strategies, driving climate action. The one element that I have to highlight is the internship does need to be based in New York City, although again, a huge value out of coming to Columbia Climate School and this MS in Climate Finance program in particular is that we're at the center of the world when it comes to finance. I think it bodes well that it needs to be based in New York City. And it's complemented by a virtual class meeting, again, providing this dynamic blend of professional experience and academic engagement. In terms of the climate school electives, I want to just note Professor Sachs certainly wants me to emphasize this is not the complete list of electives. Electives are still under development, but think of this as kind of an amuse-bouche, if you will, or a taste of possible electives. There's some additional really dynamic courses that are well under development right now. But these could be, for example, climate policy and investment or post-disaster recovery, housing, economic recovery, social impacts, business, society, and the environment. Again, you're going to have a dynamic list of climate school electives. And then for the Columbia Business School electives, we have to emphasize they've been for decades in kind of offering climate finance curriculum. So they have a really interesting and unique list of courses that could be electives for you, including impact investing, investing in social ventures, sustainability reporting, climate policy. So the list goes on. The one element I want to highlight about the MS in Climate Finance program, though, is that it really is a fairly well-curated academic journey. So you are only in this program going to be taking courses at Columbia Climate School and Columbia Business School. And when it comes to your electives, again, you're going to have some flexibility, but it will be flexibility on a menu of course options at Columbia Business School and a menu of course options at Columbia Climate School. I'll now transition over to career resources and professional development. We have a robust team here at Columbia Climate School dedicated to our graduate degree programs. Of course, they're going to, and they do offer employer info sessions, one-on-one resume and cover letter reviews. We also offer an alumni mentorship program at Columbia Climate School. This mentorship program is not only going to be for MS and climate finance students, but we have a mentorship network of other partner programs at Columbia University that would be included with that, including, for example, an MPA in Environmental Science Policy alumni network or our own MA Climate and Society program, for example. We also host sustainability skills seminars each year. So if you're interested in sustainability consulting or LEED certification, this is something that we invite practitioners to come and speak to our students, typically once or twice a month. We also host an all Ivy Environmental and Sustainable Development Career Fair. This is a really robust and dynamic event where nearly 100 employers descend upon our campus here at Columbia University and 1,000 students across the Ivy League. Again, all the employers are environmental and sustainable development in mind, although it's a mix of private and public sector employers. It's a really phenomenal event. In fact, Professor Sachs was on a panel during the session. So again, keep that on your radar if you're interested. And then we have also mock interviews and an exclusive job board listing specifically for Columbia Climate School students. I should also note the MS in Climate Finance program. We also have another member of the team, a dedicated program manager specifically for this degree program. So this is going to be a very well-resourced degree program for a relatively intimate learning community in our initial cohort. In terms of financial aid, I'll just touch on fellowships and scholarships, and then we'll talk a little bit about loans. I first want to highlight the Stanley Park Climate Finance Scholarship. I'll go into a little bit more detail in the next slide, but I want to just say a huge thank you to Professor Lisa Sachs because it was through her network and resources she was able to secure this incredibly generous gift for Columbia Climate School. So stay tuned. I'll have a little bit more detail shortly. Anybody on the call joining us today that might be a United States military veteran and qualify for the post 9/11 GI Bill, and specifically 100% of that, you may qualify for the Yellow Ribbon Program, where we can provide some additional generous support towards your graduate degree education. So if you are a military veteran, we have additional information as it relates to the Yellow Ribbon Program. We also offer climate school scholarships. The MS in Climate Finance program will have access to merit-based scholarships. These are scholarships that you would automatically be considered for at the time of your admissions application. And then we always encourage prospective students to perform independent research on external fellowships here at Columbia University. On the Columbia Climate School tuition and fees website, we do have several external fellowship directories listed. We encourage you to go ahead and take a look and begin researching those. And then, of course, there are available to U.S. citizens, certainly federal and permanent residents, that is federal loans, as well as private loans. And then for international students, private loans are also available. In fact, we have two organizations that work closely with Columbia University, Empower and Prodigy Finance. These are organizations that are able to provide loans to international students that may not require a U.S. cosigner. I now want to spend a little bit more time on the Stanley Park Climate Finance Scholarship. These scholarships are incredibly generous. It's 3 scholarships covering the full tuition for the MS in Climate Finance program. That's about $116,000. And again, for our inaugural class, we are going to be offering 3 scholarships covering full tuition. It does require a separate scholarship application that is housed within the admissions application for the MS in Climate Finance program. So all of you on the call today, I strongly encourage you to, if you haven't already started an admissions application for the MS in Climate Finance, and if you are interested in fall 2025, go ahead and log into the application portal and select the MS in Climate Finance program specifically in our program selection, and then you will have access to the Stanley Park Climate Finance Scholarship. This is for full-time students in the MS in Climate Finance program only. I do want to just say that the MS in Climate Finance program is only for full-time students. This scholarship also requires that candidates demonstrate financial need. So there are going to be several kind of questions relating to your finances embedded within the Stanley Park Climate Finance Scholarship application. And again, we're seeking candidates with the intention of contributing to the public and nonprofit sectors, and in particular, those from countries with emerging and developing economies. And we are also seeking candidates with a deep interest in addressing the distortions of climate finance and promoting solutions to substantially increase climate investments. The Stanley Park Climate Finance Scholarship will require an interview. So those candidates that are selected for it will have an interview specifically with committee members. And I can assure you one of those members is going to be Professor Lisa Sachs. So to just give one more shout out in that regard. And now let's transition to our application process. I want to emphasize that the application is holistic in nature. Every aspect of your application is carefully reviewed and assessed. So we do require a resume. We also require a quantitative resume. And my colleague Damaris Diaz, who is helping monitor our Q&A box, is going to go ahead and paste in the chat specifically the quantitative resume PDF, so that way you can take a look at what that format looks like. We also require 2 letters of recommendation. One of the recommenders should be an academic recommendation if you were enrolled in your undergraduate university within the last 5 years. If it's been more than 5 years, by all means, please feel free to submit 2 professional letters of recommendation. And then we also require your transcripts. If you attended multiple universities, we would need both unofficial college transcripts uploaded. And for those of you joining the call, if English is not your native language, and if English was not the language of instruction in your undergraduate university, we would need either a TOEFL, an IELTS, or alternatively a Duolingo English test to show English proficiency. The English language test is critical. Obviously, Columbia University, you're coming to a very rigorous institution, and we need to assure that you have a strong command of the English language in order to succeed. So we do look for minimums on those tests. That would be a 100 on the TOEFL, a 7.5 on the IELTS, and a 135 on the Duolingo English test. Finally, your statement of purpose, which is a critical component. And then the deadline for the admissions application is April 1st, 2025. Decisions will be released in the month of April. And then for Stanley Park, April 7th is when that application deadline is due, and interviews will be conducted in late April to determine the Stanley Park Climate Finance recipients. In terms of applying to the MS in Climate Finance programs, the statement of purpose, again, we want you have up to 1,000 words. That may be very long. Certainly, I've been having some calls with some candidates that are specifically targeting business schools as well as a part of their application process, and they're noticing this is an unusually long statement of purpose. You don't have to take the full 1,000, but in the statement of purpose, we really want to encourage you to share your key experiences. What are those academic and professional goals? Really highlight that as it relates to climate finance. Which climate core course are you most excited to complete, and climate finance course are you most excited to complete? So the admissions committee really should understand what are your motivations and goals as it relates to the climate finance space, and how is our program going to help you obtain those goals. So now, without further ado, I'd love to go ahead and transition to our faculty panel. And I have some general questions that I would like to address, and then we're going to go ahead and open up to the Q&A. And I see some questions rolling in, which is phenomenal. And I'm going to go ahead and just stop sharing and make sure that that we go ahead and open up to. I'm hoping everybody's can see our faces. And so we'll go ahead and start with the first question. So in terms of the first question, and maybe we'll begin with Professor Lisa Sachs. Why is it critical to study climate finance now?
Thank you so much, Alfred, and thanks to all of you joining. I have to say that the enthusiasm for this program since we announced it has been exhilarating and matches my enthusiasm for the topic. I think, as those of you joining can see and know, the energy transition is irrevocably underway, and it's necessary and attractive to governments all over the world for so many different reasons. The need for new and diversified energy sources to meet the massively growing energy demand, to bring down and stabilize energy costs for users and industry, to achieve energy independence, which is, alas, critically important now for governments around the world, to build resilience into our economy. And wonderfully, the technologies are known and are available. The technological pathways are known. The remaining challenge is the financing. And this is a challenge for governments that are trying to attract the financing. And there are a lot of investors and financial institutions that are eager to get into the financing, but it's complicated to figure out. At the same time, I should also note that the changing climate presents new risks and new opportunities to traditional means of investing and business decisions. And a lot of financial institutions and businesses are really now trying to understand how to adapt to and to take advantage of and invest in the changing climate. So it's my sincere conviction that those who understand the interrelation of climate and finance will be at the forefront of businesses and investments and financial institutions and governments in the coming years, as these skills are just so critically in demand.
Excellent. Thank you, Professor Sachs. And Professor Bruce Usher, why study climate finance now?
I would add to what Professor Sachs had to say by putting the entire degree sort of into historic context, which is that we've essentially spent the last 300 years building a global economy that's incredibly productive. We now need to spend the next 30 years rebuilding that economy, which means replacing fossil fuels with renewables, replacing transportation with electrified vehicles, and so on. You keep going. And if you look at rebuilding a global economy, you have to start with investment. That's the required to rebuild. There's a lot of estimates as to how big that number is. It could be 100 trillion, it could be 200 trillion. It doesn't really matter that the number, it's a scale. To put that into terms today, there's already more capital being invested in renewable energy than there is in fossil fuels globally. So already these sectors are very large from an investment perspective, and they are only going to get larger. So if you think about studying this topic today, what you're really thinking about is not what's the action today and what's the opportunity today, but what's going to be required over the next 30 to 40 years, essentially, for your careers. And the answer is it's just going to be an awful lot of investment in this sector.
Excellent. Thank you. So now going to the curriculum and pivoting there, why is that climate core and finance core critical for individuals wishing to perhaps enter the climate finance space? And again, I think this is interesting in that, there's many different types of degrees out there. I think we're very unique. This is not necessarily exclusively embedded in a business school. This is a climate school degree. So I'd love to hear perhaps, and we'll begin with Professor Usher, why are these courses kind of this great ingredient for the climate finance space?
And the simple answer is you can't understand climate finance without first understanding finance. Finance is a prerequisite to understanding climate finance. Climate finance is a more complex form of finance and a more targeted form of finance. So with this degree program, what we're doing is focusing on the strengths at Columbia Business School, which are finance, and teaching students in the MS in Climate Finance program those basic financial skills and knowledge. And so the courses that we're teaching are the exact same courses with the exact same faculty that we teach in the MBA program, but dedicated to this new cohort of students in this program. And we think that's going to be very powerful. And Alfred, as you said, that is unique.
Excellent. And
Can I compliment that?
Yes, please do.
I love that. Couldn't agree more, and would say that you also can't do climate finance without understanding climate. And that's what we bring at the climate school. Just as Professor Usher said, the core climate courses are those that the climate school students take. So really rigorously understanding the mitigation pathways, the challenges of adaptation, the climate science, it is really understanding those critical dimensions of climate that are not well represented right now in financial institutions and in businesses, and is precisely or in business schools, I would say, on their own. And so it is precisely that skill set and decidedly the intersection of the two, thinking about how do we actually match the climate science, the climate imperatives, the financing opportunities, the challenges, the barriers, and so on, with the financial tools and mechanisms and incentives and financial flows that we have. That is what is particularly unique about this program. And to be able to offer it with the best business school finance faculty in the country and the first and incredible climate school faculty is just really an extraordinary opportunity.
Excellent. And if we could pivot back to Professor Usher, could you tell us a little bit more about Columbia Business School and the work that they've been performing in the climate space? We'd love to hear it.
Sure. So Columbia Business School is a traditional business school. Let me just start there. So traditionally, we focused on management skills and finance and accounting and so on. But in the last half dozen years, we recognized that there are a couple of macro trends that are going to be affecting all of our graduates in the years ahead. Really two we're focusing on. One is AI, but the other one is climate change. And so enormous resources have been put in the business school into teaching climate change. We teach a introductory business and climate change course, the majority of our students. We have 3 full-time faculty focused only on climate change courses, and then about a dozen full-time faculty teaching additional supplementary courses. So that deep domain expertise has really been built up here. And as Professor Sachs said a minute ago, really pairs really nicely with the climate school, because what we don't have is, of course, the climate science and a number of the climate related areas that you want to combine to get this climate finance degree. But here at the business school, we're very, very supportive of the work in this area.
Excellent. And Professor Sachs, could you tell us a little bit about the Center on Sustainable Investment and the kind of the work that you're doing in that space?
Great. So I will say that both our center and the climate school are not quite traditional academic institutions, in that we are very applied with our work and really deeply engaged with all sorts of global actors in really trying to understand what drives investment and finance decisions through the economy, where the barriers are, where the financing is needed, how can we innovate in different structures to facilitate the financing, and to think about the impacts that investment and financing has on sustainable development and on other both business factors and risks, but also environmental and social factors that we care about as a society. So at CCSI, we are very much an applied research center. We partner with governments, intergovernmental organizations, companies, financial institutions, civil society groups, community advocates, and so on, to really deeply understand all of these factors. What are the challenges they're facing? How can we bring different actors together to change the understanding of risks and opportunities, and so on? And I will just say that we are bringing all of that knowledge and those networks to the program. So the design of the curriculum is informed by what we are understanding from our applied work about where the challenges are, where the opportunities are, where the lack of understanding is, where critical skills are needed to develop new solutions. And the extraordinary network of both the business school and Professor Usher and all of the finance practitioners that have been working in this space, and our network of representatives from governments, intergovernmental organizations, companies, those in emerging markets that face particularly acute and distinct challenges of financing, will be coming to campus to speak with the students and talking about how they see this intersection and all the different opportunities for students to contribute to the world going forward.
And then my last question, and then we're definitely going to open it up to Q&A. I do see some really interesting questions. Robert, you're the first question I'm going to ask, so stay tuned. I like it a lot. But pivoting back, what type of industries and roles can students anticipate entering this degree program? So if we could start with Professor Usher, I'd love to hear a little bit more about the opportunities you anticipate.
So from our focus here, it's more in the private sector, frankly, and we see this degree program being appealing for employers in the financial sector, banks, asset managers, private equity, and the like, and consulting firms. They're all the major consulting firms built very large climate practices and continue to build those businesses. I also want to make a comment, Alfred. Obviously, the politics and policy around climate change are widely unstable, I would say. They change, they come and go. I've worked in this sector for more than 20 years, and I've seen policies come and go. And that's, for better or worse, the normal course of progress or challenges in climate change. But the underlying business and the financing that goes with that business and the consulting and the advisory around those businesses has been a very steady trend. It's steadily been rising over time. And it's been rising over time for two very clear reasons. One is the challenge of climate change has become much greater. It's a much bigger problem than it used to be, and only will continue to get a bigger challenge. And secondly is the business opportunities to address climate change. For example, renewable energy or electric vehicles or adaptation to deal with climate change. Those business opportunities have been growing very steadily. And while policy can sort of slow down or speed up those business changes, it doesn't actually change the trajectory. A long way of saying that the employers we've seen in recent years on the business side, we expect to be much the same in the years ahead.
Thank you, Professor Usher. And Professor Sachs, I'd love your thoughts.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And we work so much with the private sector where these skills in businesses and all different types of financial institutions around the world where these skills are so sorely needed and will be increasingly needed. But I'll just complement what Professor Usher said, because I also work with a lot of public actors, both domestic, who are, by the way, as active as ever, even in this political climate, green banks, policymakers, both domestically, but also, of course, all over the world, multilateral development banks, ministries of finance around the world. There's so many different, not only financial institutions, actually, but other types of government agencies, UN agencies, intergovernmental organizations, even civil society groups and advocates that are thinking, that are right now very focused on this question of how to integrate climate into financing decisions and how to accelerate financing into climate action. And so there'll be just, frankly, unlimited opportunities to bring these skills to a real diverse range of career trajectories, both domestically and internationally.
Thank you. So the first question, I think it's an interesting tie-in. Where do you think the biggest skills gaps are in the market is in the energy transition, and how does the climate finance program meet that? Perhaps we could begin with Professor Sachs.
Great. So I'll maybe speak to one that I think will be distinct from what Professor Usher would bring, which is that one of my particular areas of focus is how to scale finance in emerging markets and developing countries. As you may know, the COP outcome document said that that the countries would commit 300 billion in some way, and that would leverage 1.3 trillion in private financing to emerging markets, but without at all acknowledging the very structural constraints to mobilizing the finance. There are a lot of structural barriers and complexities that have made it hard for emerging markets and developing countries to actually attract investment. And by the way, that make it equally hard for those who want to invest in those countries to invest in those countries. So I think really understanding what those challenges are, how they can be addressed from an institutional reform perspective, but also how we can think about innovative financing mechanisms from the private sector side and others to unlock the opportunities in emerging markets will be a tremendously valuable skill set.
And adding to Professor Sachs, there's no question, as she pointed out, that the greatest challenges are in emerging economies to executing on climate finance. But I would say in developed countries, including the US, I think there's not a great understanding of the challenges to investing here. And most importantly, how to overcome those challenges. I mean, understanding the challenge is one thing, it's how to manage those challenges. So for example, when we look at climate finance in my course, we understand the basics of how to invest, where the opportunities lie. That's in many ways the straightforward, the easy part of it. Then we get into the risks and the challenges and how do you mitigate, how do you hedge those, how do you manage those so you can be a successful investor. At the end of the day, we need to mobilize trillions of dollars in capital. We need to be able to do it with reasonable risk-adjusted returns. And that's the knowledge and the skill base that we really want to build in our students.
Excellent. Another question, some of the questions are a little bit more basic. I just saw, for example, do you require a minimum number of years of work experience? No, I want to acknowledge that we actually we're anticipating some interesting profiles, and maybe actually let me, Professor Usher and Professor Sachs, what would be like the typical profiles you would anticipate entering this program? Perhaps Professor Usher, maybe if we could hear kind of your lens, who would be a good fit for this degree?
Yeah. Let me begin by saying a good fit would be anyone who's pretty clear on this is the career path they want. Yes. In other words, certainly applicants might be considering, for example, an MBA program. MBA program has some similarities. I mentioned the same finance courses, at least the same core finance courses we teach in both programs. But an MBA program's designed for someone who perhaps a much broader interest in business. They're looking to understand a lot more about business more generally, more broadly. This program, if someone says, I want to work in finance, and specifically, I want to work in climate finance, it's a much clearer career path, and as a result, it's also a shorter program.
Excellent. Professor Sachs.
Yeah, I agree, of course, and we'll just say, since I've heard from many wonderful interested applicants, that I am seeing applicants who have been working for a while in the financial sector, but want to deepen their expertise on climate, understanding the risks, understanding the opportunities, and so on. And so those are experienced practitioners that have deep expertise in finance, but really want to understand better this intersection. And then likewise, those who have been in the climate space for a while and realize the importance of really understanding finance and how to think about the addressing climate through the financial lens. So those are both coming from very different backgrounds, but I think both very suitable for the program. And then I would also just underscore what Alfred said, that we're not expecting any particular amount of experience. So though I do think that the degree program is suitable for those who have experience and want to deepen their experience at the intersection, I think it's also very suitable for, as Professor Usher said, those who know that this is the career track that they want to go on and haven't yet developed don't yet have professional experience, but want to begin their career with the fundamental skills, a fundamental understanding of finance and of climate. And I think this is a very good program to launch that career trajectory as well.
Excellent, thank you. Another question, and actually I do recall Professor Usher addressed this kind of at the last virtual session, the first virtual session we hosted, relates to, we do have a number of students on the call that are coming to this interest with finance backgrounds, and they're highlighting some of the finance cores they might have taken as undergraduate students, or maybe they already have an MBA. Will they be required to retake the courses? And I know there's an exemption exam policy,
yeah.
in essence.
That's right. So anyone who joins the program who has the financial knowledge, it may be through your studies or it may be through work. If they wish, they can take an exemption exam, and if they pass the exemption exam, they don't have to take. And we have that for all of our finance courses, and that's, of course, the MBA program is the same thing.
Yes, yes. It's important to note that if you exempt out of a course, it doesn't mean that you have fewer courses to take. It just means that you'll have a list of additional electives, perhaps, that you're able to then to explore. So thank you, Professor Usher. Let's see here. Forgive me. I got lost in the sauce, and I have my questions in front of me, and then I should be a little better prepared.
There's a student asking if I could just mention the opposite to the question you just asked me, Alfred. What if a student does not have any finance background? Obviously, they're not going to take the exemption exam to exempt out of the finance course. But no, if they're interested in this sector, they should still apply. It's designed so that someone does not have a finance background, the program can still be a very good fit. That being said, the student should be, any applicant should be at least generally comfortable with, numeric analysis, basic, comfortable with basic math and the like. It is obviously an analytical program. You should be comfortable with that, but you do not need any finance background.
Excellent question. In terms of, and I will just highlight, there's a component of the application process that's called the quantitative resume, and that, again, Damaris Diaz highlighted. That's a very important component. We recognize there will be some overlap between your professional resume and the quantitative resume, but the admissions committee is going to be paying particularly close attention to that quantitative resume. So that's something that we also just want to briefly highlight. Is there, gosh, now I'm looking, is there any questions that you saw, Lisa? Sorry, that you would want to highlight? I saw a lot of questions about the developing countries, and I think you might have already, but if you're coming from a developing.
Yeah, and maybe actually, Alfred, because you had flagged, thank you, that the list of electives that you had shared was just an illustrative list for now. So maybe I'll touch on this point for now. One of the aspects of this field of climate finance that I find extraordinarily interesting, but also very important, is that it's a very broad topic that includes many different dimensions of thinking about the intersection of climate and finance. Different actors in the ecosystem are interested in thinking about this field quite differently. So thinking about, from a financial institution perspective, how they should rigorously understand the evolution of risks and of opportunities. That's one dimension. But then, as the question alludes to, and is very much my focus, for those who are still suffering from energy poverty or are most vulnerable to climate change impacts, that are really struggling to attract climate finance, that's a very different question for those countries about how do you actually attract or find the climate financing that's needed, and how do we address the structural constraints or more innovative financial models to accelerate financing. So our goal with the program is to offer a suite of electives that, in addition to understanding the core finance, understanding how finance work, understanding the mitigation, adaptation, pathways, and climate science, that there will be a diversity of electives to allow those who are interested in these particular dimensions to deepen their understanding in these various aspects of climate finance, both in the classroom, but also, as I mentioned, through a regular stream of visitors and practitioners who will talk about their work at all of these intersections. For the very specific question of emerging markets in developing countries, I can assure you that that will be part of the program, because it is a core it is of core importance to the question of climate finance. It is a core personal interest. And one of the required classes at the climate school is on international climate finance, which will look at all of the international institutions that are part of the climate finance ecosystem and how finance flows internationally. So for sure, everybody will learn something about financing climate in emerging and developing countries. And for those who are particularly interested, there'll be more opportunities to go in depth in that area.
Excellent. There's some rather specific questions around the climate finance curriculum in particular. Professor Usher, if I could just throw one out there. Does the program integrate trends like AI and blockchain in climate finance?
We are increasingly incorporating AI from two perspectives. One is using AI tools in the classroom and in preparing for the educational materials. And then, of course, we also look at AI from the perspective of driving more demand for energy and as a tool to help us address climate change. So I would say the answer to that is yes. Blockchain, less so. It's not currently incorporated in the course. That doesn't mean it wouldn't be in the future, but we haven't seen a lot of applications for that yet.
Thank you. And then this is an interesting one. Maybe Professor Sachs, I'll throw this one your way. How does the program approach climate finance solutions? No, forgive me. I got lost. I'm telling you, too many questions that came in. Forgive me, I was working off another document that had the questions, and I think it might have been.
I can maybe also, Alfred, answer one of those questions
great.
I see a question asking about how far along the spaces of sustainable finance and responsible investing, and intrigued by the question, because I think I have a particular view on that, which is that in terms of rhetoric and products and interest, and how much we're talking about the fields of climate finance, sustainable finance, and responsible investing, there's been, of course, a massive proliferation in recent years, and then now a massive attack even more recently. But in terms of how thoughtfully we have evolved that field and disaggregated the concept and thought actually about what this intersection looks like for different financial actors from a much more pragmatic perspective rather than with the rhetoric, I don't think that we've evolved too far. And those who join this program truly will be the ones that help to define the field and to lead institutions in navigating this intersection going forward. I think in really rigorously understanding and evolving how financial institutions think about the energy transition, which is an unprecedented economic transformation with investments that are needed that we've never done before, with unpredictable evolving risks facing different asset classes and so on. We're not terribly evolved. Professor Usher, I wonder if you would agree, in really rigorously understanding how to integrate the climate science into those types of decision makings, and whether or not our systems, our financing systems, domestically and internationally, are fit for purpose in mobilizing finance in this evolving world. So that's where I see tremendous opportunity. I don't think we're that far along, and I think a program like this could not be more timely in helping us navigate that going forward. But Professor Usher, I wonder what you would say from the business school perspective.
I agree, Professor Sachs. We're not that far along, especially in emerging economies. We're absolutely not very far along. In developed economies, I think there's a lot of unknowns about what's most effective, what's working, where where the scaling is likely to get us to where we need to go. In some places we are on a good path, and others much less so. One of the things I really love about this area is there's so much going on in so many different places. It's like a thousand flowers bloom kind of thing. And there's a lot to be learned from that. I think over time we'll start to, focus. As the industry gets bigger, it actually gets more focused over time. Alfred, there's a question here about where this degree would be useful for policymakers.
Yeah.
That's an interesting question. And my response to that would be yes, but in other words, if someone already has a lot of policymaking expertise, perhaps they already have a degree, a policy degree, or a lot of experience in the area. I think this degree, the MS in climate finance, could be very useful because you really would understand how the financial sector works with respect to climate change, and then you could go back. You could then use your policy skills to help shape that going forward. But I wouldn't recommend it for someone who does not have a policy background, wants to be in policy. This is ultimately a climate science and finance degree.
Excellent. Okay, I did find the interesting question that I was hoping to ask. How does the program address challenges like greenwashing and ensuring that climate finance has tangible impacts? And maybe
Yeah.
Mr. Sachs, yeah.
I'll
Yeah,
maybe
first,
just
you go first, and I'll go next.
Okay, to my mind, the idea of the program is specifically to address that. It's to have a more rigorous and real understanding of what climate finance means. To my mind, what has allowed for a lot of the greenwashing, and sometimes it's not greenwashing, it's just real confusion and conflation. It's all of the things, is that we really don't have this rigorous understanding of how climate and finance intersect, both from a risk perspective and an impact perspective. I think the regulatory landscape in the US and in the EU is going to shape that going forward, in that the kind of rhetoric is likely to die down. And I don't mind that, because a lot of it has been disconnected from real actual rigorous integration of climate considerations and real financing solutions. So I think that, to my mind, my whole interest in this program is to create a more informed set of practitioners throughout the economy and the public and private sectors who know what they're talking about when they talk about climate finance, and can help elevate real rigorous thinking above some of the rhetoric. Curious what Professor Usher
And I
has
would
to
just
say.
add very briefly 2 points. One is I agree with Professor Sachs. There's been a lot of greenwashing. I think a lot of greenwashing has actually been confusion. It's not necessarily intentional greenwashing. These are very complex issues, and I think a lot of businesses start with good plans and then get confused along the way. But there has been certainly greenwashing. But I think in the next few years, especially here in the US, but actually in Europe too, we're going to see the opposite of greenwashing. We're seeing a fair bit of green hushing. And I bring that up because you do have to be careful to what you read in the media is not always what's going on in the real world. And while greenwashing was companies exaggerating what they were doing in the media, and you had to really sort of understand what was really going on, the opposite, you would think that nothing is going on with regard to addressing climate change. And in fact, there's a lot of activity. So in both cases, whether we're era of greenwashing, green hushing, it's really important that this program and that our students understand what's really going on.
I'll just say several students have been asking questions as it relates to decisions. We are planning on releasing decisions in April, so I just want to anchor everybody in understanding around the admissions decisions. And I'm going to ask maybe one more question. Let's see here, the latest one that just came in. How does climate finance, how does climate finance be sustainable and attractive for investors and issuers of climate instruments, considering the extra work that it requires to compare the conventional/contemporary financial instruments?
I think that's a very good question, and curious again for Professor Usher's view. But I will say we're working on this again from at CCSI from the perspective, in our case, of trying to mobilize more finance, and therefore to make it less comparatively difficult to finance these critical investments, especially in emerging markets. This is exactly one of the types of barriers, is that blended finance products, or investing in lesser known geographies or technologies, or some of the areas that need financing so much, is extra work and untested, and therefore it's both hard, time consuming, and there aren't incentives for those who are proposing investments to take that risk. So these are kind of exactly the questions that we're looking at from the perspective of trying to address whether risk perceptions are misaligned with real return opportunities, or what are other innovative mechanisms that can make it easier to invest at scale, to make it more attractive. But Professor Usher, what's the view from the finance side?
So my view is very simple. All investing is about optimizing risk and return. And sometimes that requires extra work, extra risks or extra new return opportunities. But in my experience, people in the finance sector don't have a problem working hard or being told to work hard. So really, it's about how do you reduce risk? How do you increase return? And that's really what we focus on in the program.
Excellent. Well, I really do appreciate everybody for their time. And
Alfred, can I give one more pitch as I look out over the beautiful New York City landscape? I just want to say, because I don't know if we've said that learning these topics in New York City is really an unparalleled opportunity, in my view, even in spite of or even because of what's happening in this country. But we are in the financial hub of finance. We are in the diplomatic hub of global governance with the UN here. We have an unbelievably steady stream of incredible leaders from around the world and from the financial sector who are coming to New York, but also to Columbia with great frequency, and look forward to and do meet with our students all the time. So the opportunity to study these topics here in New York, I think, is just the absolute icing on the cake, and will ensure that even within a very limited one-year program, which is quite short, that students will really be exposed to a true diversity and range of different applications of climate finance, which I'm incredibly excited for.
all right. Well, I think that brings us right almost to time. I just want to say a huge thank you to Professor Sachs and Professor Usher. Again, you guys are kind of bringing this new degree program, which we're all extremely excited about, to life. And for the students that are joining the call, please feel free to contact the Office of Admissions if you have more general follow-up questions, especially as it relates to things like the application process. That's what we are here for, to answer those questions and serve as a resource. The application deadline is April 1st, 2025, and we are planning on getting those decisions turned around fairly quickly. But if you have any follow-up, please feel free to reach out to our team. All right. Thank you again, everybody, and have a good one, Professor Usher and Professor Sachs. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.